My dad raised his glass and said, "Your sister just closed on a gorgeous home. When will you catch up, Stella?" I stood up and walked out. Thanksgiving at our house always came with a script. No one ever admitted it, but it was obvious: the golden turkey, the matching linen napkins, the playlist of carefully curated jazz humming in the background. Even the laughter felt rehearsed, like we were playing out the same scene from a family drama we couldn't admit we were tired of. Every year we gathered around that polished mahogany table like nothing was broken. And every year my father found a way to turn the spotlight toward my sister, Cara, the crown jewel, the golden girl. He'd raise a glass, his voice booming with charm and pride, and say something like, "Your sister just closed on a gorgeous new home, 4 bedrooms, a porch, like something out of a movie. She's always been ahead of the curve." And then, without fail, his eyes would drift to me with that performative smirk. "When will you catch up, Stella?" The laugh track would kick in. My uncles, aunts, cousins, they'd chuckle, shake their heads as if Dad was just being classic Dad. But I wasn't laughing. I never laughed. I smiled. I stayed still. I played my part. That was my role, Stella the helper. The one who arrived early to set the table, who brought the good wine, who folded the extra chairs and asked if there were enough desserts. The one who got questions like, "Still doing that job thing?" or "Did you ever finish that certification program?" The questions weren't malicious, but they weren't real either. They were placeholders, small talk that politely skipped over my life, my real life. Cara, though. She got engagement toasts, job promotions, and Paris vacations. Sharp as a tack, Dad would say, proudly clinking his glass to hers. Our little powerhouse mom would add, and Cara would blush just enough to seem humble, like she wasn't soaking it up like sunlight. I used to tell myself I didn't mind, that I was grounded humble, that staying under the radar made me strong. But inside, I was crumbling quietly, invisibly. Every laugh that followed those jokes carved another line into my spirit, another whisper that said, "You'll never be her." When I was 10, Cara got a trophy for perfect attendance. I had just won an art contest, a statewide one. But that night, Dad brought up her perfect attendance 3 times at dinner. No one asked about my painting. When I was 16, I passed my driving test on the first try. Cara failed hers twice. And still, I was the one Dad teased Stella only passed because the instructor was too bored to keep testing her. It became a pattern. Praise for her. Ribbing for me. And somehow I let it become the truth. I'd sit in silence while Cara told stories about corporate wins and home renovations, waiting for someone, anyone, to ask me what I was building. No one did, because I wasn't loud about it. Because I wasn't loud, they assumed I wasn't anything. But I wasn't invisible. I was exhausted. And this year, this Thanksgiving, I didn't come to play the same role. I didn't show up to take orders or nod politely when Dad spun another one of his perfect Cara stories. I came dressed in a burgundy sweater, a bottle of Pinot Noir in hand, and a quiet knowing in my chest. Not to outshine anyone, not to compete, but because for the first time in my life, I wasn't there to blend in. I was there to be seen. It didn't happen in a single thunderclap. There wasn't some cataclysmic fallout or explosive argument. No slamming doors, no shouted accusations, just silence, the kind that sneaks in when you've been quiet for so long you forget what it feels like to take up space. The breaking point was subtle, ordinary even. It was the year I didn't go home for Thanksgiving. I lied, of course. Told Mom I had a deadline, said I couldn't get time off. She believed me because believing me was always easier than asking questions. I sat alone in my apartment that night, Thai takeout on the coffee table, fuzzy socks on my feet. The muted glow of a Hallmark movie played in the background while happy, fictional families laughed around fictional tables. I waited to feel sad, to feel left out. Instead, I felt still. That silence. It felt like oxygen. No one asking about catching up. No one measuring me against Cara. No one treating me like a misfired version of someone else's success. In that stillness, I heard a different voice, my own, and it didn't whisper failure, it whispered, now what? So I started small. I took the freelance contracts everyone said wouldn't last. I stacked them client by client, slowly turning patchwork gigs into reliable income. I researched until 3 a.m., taught myself how to write business proposals, handle taxes, manage social strategy. Within 6 months, I was earning more than I had in 2 years at my old job. By month 10, I moved out of my cramped walk-up. And just past the 1-year mark, I signed papers on a house. Not a condo, not a fixer-upper. A real house just over 4,000 square feet of peace and privacy. No fanfare, no curated Instagram post, no just closed selfies or champagne key handovers. Just me, my keys, and the sound of a door opening into something I had built completely alone. It wasn't secrecy, it was sacred. Every time I crossed a milestone, I wondered just a little what Dad would say if he knew. Would he be proud? Would he take credit, call it inevitable, like it had all been part of some long game he predicted? But the phone never rang. He never asked. Not once did he call to check in, even when I skipped family gatherings 2 years in a row. No one did. They assumed I was drifting, that I was lost. Because to them, visibility meant value. If they couldn't see it, it didn't count. If it didn't look like Cara's life, it wasn't worth noticing. That used to burn deep, corrosive, but lately, it just made things clearer. I had been climbing my own mountain all this time. Just because they were staring at a different peak didn't mean mine wasn't real. So when the Thanksgiving invite came again this year, I hovered over the RSVP button, thumb shaking. I almost declined. But then I thought about that dinner table, that script, that polished set where I'd always played the background role, and I decided I was done shrinking. I didn't need applause, but I refused to be erased. So I clicked yes. And when I walked through that door wearing confidence like a second skin, I didn't do it to rub anything in. I did it to reclaim space, to take back the air that had always been mine to breathe. The house looked the same. Of course it did. Mom's perfect table setting, Dad's carved turkey routine, the ambient jazz, the clink of silverware, Cara's laugh, flowing like a well-rehearsed melody. But I was different. I walked in with a bottle of Pinot Noir and a steady heart. My cousin Abby caught my eye from across the room and gave me a warm smile. "You look amazing," she whispered as I slid into my seat at the far end of the table. I smiled back. I didn't need her to say more. I didn't need validation, but it felt good, like someone had finally noticed. Dinner unfolded in its usual rhythm. Platters passed polite conversation. Dad's jokes filled the air. Trevor, Cara's husband, chuckled too loudly too often. Mom buzzed around the table like a hostess with something to prove. I kept quiet, calm. I watched the way everyone floated in orbit around Cara, like she was the center of some unspoken system we'd all agreed on decades ago. But inside me, a truth sat steady. I didn't belong in that orbit, not anymore. Then came dessert, pecan pie, Dad's favorite. And right on cue, he set down his fork, dabbed at his mouth with a napkin, and raised his voice just enough to demand the room. "Well, your sister has some big news," he boomed. "Cara just closed on a gorgeous new home. 4 bedrooms, granite countertops, wraparound porch, everything." "Oh, wow," Aunt Carol gushed. "She's just always ahead of the curve," Trevor's mom cooed. Dad chuckled and turned his eyes to me. "Stella, when are you going to catch up, huh?" There it was. The moment. The line. Every head turned toward me. Some curious, some amused. Even Cara tilted her head expectant, waiting for my usual brush off, but I didn't flinch. I didn't stutter or shrink. I looked my father in the eye and smiled. Not bitter, not smug, just steady. I did. I said, voice even. I just didn't invite anyone who doubts me. Silence. Not dramatic, not explosive, but sharp like a pinprick in the skin of a balloon. Cara's fork paused midair. Trevor blinked. Aunt Carol tilted her head, confused. Mom froze mid-pour of sparkling cider. Dad blinked. He did. I picked up my water glass, took a sip, and nodded. About a year ago. A year, Mom echoed, blinking fast. Why didn't you say anything? I guess it never came up. That answer, soft but true, landed like a quiet verdict. No anger, no drama, just a mirror. And I let them sit in it. Let them feel what it was like to not already know my story. Dad gave a short laugh, one of those tight, dismissive ones he uses when control slips from his grasp. Well, he said, waving a hand, that's cryptic. It's not. I said, tone calm. You asked. I answered. He glanced around the table like he was trying to read the room, reclaim some unspoken authority. So what, you bought a house? He asked, voice dipped in doubt. I have, I replied. Paid in full. That did it. The air in the room shifted. It wasn't jealousy, not yet. It was confusion, recalibration. Aunt Carol let out a soft, "Oh." Trevor blinked again. Cara's posture straightened, defensive. Dad gave a brittle laugh. That's a lot of space for someone on their own. Maybe I said reaching for a role, but like I said, no mortgage. So it's not really a burden. Still no anger. Just truth. The silence wasn't awkward. It was adjusting, like the room was slowly catching up to a reality they hadn't even considered. And I let them. I didn't rush to soften it. Didn't pad it with self-deprecation. They had spent so long scripting who I was. Now they had to face the unscripted version. Dad didn't know what to do with the silence. He fumbled for a tone, humor, disbelief, maybe even praise, but none of them landed. I watched as his smile flickered, then faded altogether. Cara was the first to speak. Of course she was. That's great, Stella, she said with the kind of syrupy sweetness that tried to sound supportive but landed hollow. Buying a house is a big deal. You didn't want to share that with your family? I met her gaze directly. You mean the family that only ever asks how close I am to being like you? Her expression cracked just slightly. A flicker in her eyes, a shift in her jaw. I didn't hide it out of spite. I continued. I just didn't feel the need to explain myself anymore. Dad leaned forward, trying to pull the conversation back into something he could steer. So what kind of work are you doing now? I thought you were still freelancing. I was. Now I run my own consultancy. 6 clients under retainer. Mom blinked. 6? I nodded. Financially independent, no loans, no help. Dad sat back in his chair like he'd been hit with a gust of wind. Well, he said, latching on to the one thing he could. Cara's neighborhood is fantastic. Great schools, great long-term investment. Totally, I said, voice light. Although technically, it's not her name on the deed. The table fell still. Cara's mouth parted. Excuse me? I kept my tone neutral. It's just what the records show. Trevor signed the mortgage. It's public info, you know. Registry of Deeds. Trevor flushed, looking like he'd rather disappear into his mashed potatoes. We're married, he mumbled. It's our house. Of course, I replied. But we both know how banks work. Cara's voice sharpened. Why would you even look that up? I didn't, I said. Someone sent it to me. Months ago. Said it was funny how I was always the one being compared, when I was the only one not owing a bank anything. Dad raised a hand. Okay, this is getting out of hand. No, I said quietly, it's finally honest. And that's when I saw it, that flicker in Dad's eyes. Not anger, not pride, doubt. For the first time, he didn't know who the golden child at the table really was. Cara crossed her arms, her voice tight. I never asked to be compared. I nodded, neither did I. But it happened anyway. Every holiday, every birthday, every time someone looked through me to get to you. The table was silent. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I'm not attacking, I said. I'm just done pretending. I reached for my glass and took a slow sip. I built something real. I just didn't need an audience to clap for me along the way. No one moved. Cara looked like she was holding her breath. Trevor's face was frozen, his fork untouched. Mom dabbed at the corner of her eye with a napkin, lips trembling. And Dad looked older than I remembered. Not physically, just smaller, like a man who had built a worldview on a foundation that just cracked beneath his feet. Cara's voice came back low and brittle. For someone who didn't want attention, you sure timed this pretty perfectly. I tilted my head. I didn't time anything. You asked when I'd catch up. I simply answered. Trevor shifted uncomfortably beside her. Let's not make this a competition. It's always been a competition, I said gently, just one I wasn't told I was in. That hit the table like thunder. Even Mom glanced at Cara, really glanced at her for the first time, uncertainty behind her eyes. I kept going. I worked 12-hour days for 3 years, no vacations, no backup plan. I stayed up until 2 a.m., designing pitch decks and learning SEO. I taught myself contracts. I built everything from scratch. I looked around the table. No one asked, not once. Aunt Carol, to her credit, blinked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. You skipped 2 Thanksgivings, she murmured. I nodded. And no one called. No one checked in. You just assumed I was floundering, that I was still the one behind. Cara scoffed. So what you want, applause, a parade for doing your job? No, I said. I wanted a family that didn't measure my worth by how closely I mirrored your life. She looked stunned, like I had spoken in a language she didn't know existed. I never claimed to be better, I added. But you all made it very clear I was somehow less. And I believed it, until I realized your standards had nothing to do with me. The table didn't move. No one blinked. No one reached for their wine. You praised what you could measure: square footage, job titles, curated photos, but not resilience, not risk, not doing the hard things in silence. Dad finally spoke, voice low. Why didn't you just tell us? I turned to him. Because it wouldn't have mattered. You already decided who I was a long time ago. You put me in a box labeled still trying and never looked inside. He inhaled sharply. That's not fair. It's not about fairness, I said. It's about pattern. Then I turned to Cara. You're not the villain, but you've never once used your voice to shift the spotlight. You stood in it because it was handed to you and never asked why it was so one-sided. She stared at me. Guilt flickered in her eyes. Or maybe it was something deeper. Recognition. I didn't know, she said quietly. You didn't ask, I replied. And you never wondered why I stopped showing up. Mom's eyes welled up her napkin, trembling in her fingers. Stella. I didn't realize, she said, voice cracking at the edge. I know I replied, not with spite, but with exhaustion. That's the problem. The silence that followed wasn't confrontational. It was recognition, the sharp, undeniable kind. The kind that echoed in the quiet between words. Everyone at that table was suddenly aware of something they had refused to acknowledge. I had grown. I had arrived. And they hadn't seen a thing. The air felt different now. Not heavy, not awkward. Just honest. I sat back steady, no longer trying to force understanding or reach for empathy that had never been offered. There was power in letting people sit with their own discomfort. I'd spent years holding space for them, patting their egos, laughing at jokes that chipped away at me 1 year at a time. I wasn't doing that anymore. Cara's voice broke the silence again, barely above a whisper. I didn't know you felt that way. I tilted my head. Did you ever ask? She blinked. I just thought, you liked being low-key, that you didn't care about this stuff. I don't care about stuff, I said. I care about being seen. Not for what I post, not for what I wear, just for who I am. Trevor looked at Cara, then at me, his voice awkward. You really paid it off, the house, I nodded. Every cent, no loans, no co-signer, just me. He leaned back, stunned. Damn. Cara looked like she was unraveling internally, her well-practiced poise faltering. So you came here just to drop that on us, to make us feel bad? I shook my head. No. I came to dinner because I was tired of pretending I was still trying to catch up. I'm not. I just never asked anyone to clap for me along the way. Aunt Carol shifted in her seat. You always seemed so quiet. I was quiet, I said. Not small. And that's when I looked to Dad, really looked at him. The man who had spent decades measuring me against a checklist, only he understood. You wanted me to catch up, I said, but I was never behind. You just never looked. His face slackened, and in that moment, he looked like someone trying to reconcile two versions of a story he thought he knew. You're right, he said, barely audible. That was all I needed. I folded my napkin and stood. The movement was smooth, deliberate. My heart wasn't racing. I wasn't walking out of rage, I was walking out because the chapter had ended. Mom stood slightly. Stella, wait. I met her gaze with something softer than she expected. You always wanted me to come home, I said gently, but never once asked if I was okay. You just wanted updates you could brag about, not the truth of who I was becoming. Her mouth opened, but the words didn't come. I turned to Cara next. We don't have to be close. But it would have meant something if just once. You'd pulled me aside and asked how I was doing. Really doing. No filters, no followers, just sister to sister. Her eyes shimmered. No defense left, just silence. Finally, I turned to Dad, the man whose approval I had once chased like oxygen. You built a world where success looked one way, where love had conditions. I didn't fit, so you didn't see me. He swallowed hard, his throat bobbing. Stella. I don't need an apology, I said. I just needed the truth to be heard. No one moved. No one begged me to stay. And for once, that felt like progress. I slipped on my coat, grabbed my purse. No tears, no outburst, just clarity, peace. The door clicked open behind me. The cold air rushed in, stinging my skin in the most refreshing way. I paused at the threshold, turning just slightly. I was never the one who needed to catch up, I said one last time. And I walked out. Not one person called after me. Not a single attempt to stop me. And for the first time in years, that silence didn't feel like rejection. It felt like release. The walk to my car was slow and silent, not dramatic, not triumphant, just still. I slid into the driver's seat, let the engine hum to life, and sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, watching my breath fog the window. I could still see the outline of the house in the rearview mirror. Warm lights, laughter, the clink of dishes. The show went on without me, and that was okay. For so many years, I thought leaving meant failure, that if I walked out, I was giving up. But as I sat there, engine purring beneath me, I realized something. I hadn't walked out to escape them. I had walked out because I had finally found myself, and I wasn't willing to leave her behind to keep playing a part in their script. Out here in the cold evening air, I wasn't the girl with the folding chairs. I wasn't the forgotten sister or the unfinished version of someone else's success. I was Stella, the woman who built her life quietly, completely, and without compromise. There was no applause, no spotlight. No, we were wrong. But I didn't need it anymore. I remembered something my grandfather once told me when I was 13, sitting on his porch while everyone else took family photos I wasn't invited to. He leaned over, handed me a mug of hot cocoa, and said, "You don't have to shine in their light. You just have to stop forgetting you have your own." That voice echoed in me now. Strong, clear. I had spent so long trying to be understood. Now I just needed to be true. They could stay at that table passing pie and pretending nothing cracked. But something had, not in anger, but in awareness. The way a mirror breaks when it finally reflects too much truth. And when they eventually sat down next year, maybe they'd notice the empty chair. Maybe they'd remember what was said, not because it was loud, but because it was real. Maybe Cara would finally wonder what it cost me to sit silently year after year. Or maybe she wouldn't. Either way, I was free. No more proving, no more shrinking, no more waiting to be seen in a house built to overlook me. Because I wasn't behind. I had already arrived, and I wasn't going back. Have you ever been made to feel like the afterthought at your own family table? Like your quiet success didn't count because it didn't come with applause? Share your story in the comments I'll be reading. And if this resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stick around for more stories of resilience, truth, and quiet power. You're not behind. You're just not where they expected you to be.